In this module, we're going to be learning Mountain Brook pose, which is a really lovely back bend where the body is draped in these wave-like patterns over the props. Let's take a look at the props we're going to be using in Mountain Brook. I'm going to show you 3 different setups, and we'll be using blankets in each of them. So we're going to take a standard fold blanket at the top of the mat. And you want the fringe edge to be facing away from the center of the mat, so you've got this nice smooth seam. Right? And then you'll take your second blanket, and that's going to be folded in a single fold. Right? So if you remember a single fold, you're just folding it over once. And again, you'll make a nice smooth edge with your blanket. So you want a little bit of space between the single fold blanket and the blanket at the top of the mat. And actually, I'm going to have Keely come to lie down, and she's going to have her hips in front of the blanket, right? And then she'll lie down with her back, or her shoulders rather, coming just off the top edge of the blanket, and her head will come onto the blanket at the top of the mat. Okay, that looks good. So you want the shoulders to be off the blanket, the neck is supported, and her head is supported here. And then we're going to take another single fold blanket, right? So you've taken it off the stack. We fold it in half. If you wouldn't mind bending your knees for me, please, Keely. And you'll lay this down across the mat and lengthen your legs back out. This is going to support the backs of the knees. Right, so Mountain Brook is a really lovely back bend where the chest is opening, the throat is opening, right? And you can actually, if you look at her body here, you can see those slight waves through the body. There are a couple of choices with the arm placement in this pose. So Keely, would you mind taking your arms up? Right, this is the first version, right, where the shoulders are dropping, palms are facing up. If it's difficult for the hands, the wrists to come to the ground, like Keely's demonstrating, this wouldn't be a great position for the arms for you. You would take your arms out to the sides. The third variation with the arms would be to have the arms closer into the side, and you can take the blanket and tuck it in slightly so there's room for the arms to come in. And it's almost like you've got that little bit of not pressure, but action between the arms and the upper chest. Right? So you can see how her shoulders are dropping here, her hips are dropping, right? And then the knees are supported with the blanket. Now, if you feel any tension in your low back here, a really lovely option is to bend the knees and to step the feet to the ground or to the blanket, right? So now you can see actually that her low back here is dropping even more. So this is a good choice if you or any of your students have any low back tension. Right, so this is the first setup of Mountain Brook pose. And then to come out of the pose, Keely is going to just carefully roll over onto her side. And like any of the poses, right, you're taking your time with the transitions. The transitions are just as important as the poses themselves. Right, so Keely's going to press into her hand to lift herself up to sit. For the second version of this pose, the head blanket will stay in the same spot, the blanket that is supporting the upper back will stay in the same spot, but the blanket supporting the knees, we're actually going to make a long roll with the blanket, right? So from the smooth end, right, you're going to fold the blanket once, right? Just smooth out any of the creases, right? And then you'll roll the blanket up into a nice tight roll. And that's going to come underneath the knees in this variation. So if you wouldn't mind coming back down. All right, so her legs come over the blanket, shoulders again coming between the space between the shoulder blanket and the head. And one option we could do, actually I'll show you in the next variation with the neck roll. I'll keep Keely where she is. She looks quite comfortable. All right, so we're going to do one more thing here with the feet, right? This is a really nice choice to support the backs of the heels. I particularly like this because I feel very grounded in this shape. So if you wouldn't mind bending your knees for a moment, Keely. Right, so you're going to take a little roll. It might need 1 roll or 2, depending upon how the feet lay on the blanket. So lengthen your legs back out, please. Let me just slide this down a bit. So if you can see now, the blanket is not supporting the backs of her heels, it's supporting more of the calf. So I'm just going to slide this down. If you could drop your feet down. How does that feel? Feel good? Okay, good. And again, as the knees are a little more supported here, you can start to see more of those waves in the body. And again, the same option with the arms. You could have your arms out to the side, you could have them up overhead, or you could tuck them into the sides. And hands resting on the abdomen can feel really nice. I actually like this because you can actually feel the breath moving in the body, and it's slightly more grounding with the elbows rooting down into the blanket. All right, so this is version number 2. And then the same transition to come out of it. Keely's going to step her feet to the ground and then carefully roll onto her side. Right, and then lift up to sit. For this third setup, we're going to keep the blanket that was under Keely's head, and then we'll take the blanket that was under the knees, and we're going to add that to the blanket that comes under the upper back. So you've got this nice little stack of blankets now. We're going to add a bolster, and that's going to come underneath the knees, and the blanket roll that comes under the heels is going to stay in place. We may have to adjust things as Keely lies down, but we'll start in this position. We're actually also going to add a neck roll to the blanket. And you can roll it up once. We'll start with once, right? And that fills in the space of the cervical spine. I actually really like this under my neck, but it's really personal preference whether you prefer to lie flat or whether you like to have the support of the blanket. So Keely, if you could come and sit with your hips between the bolster and the blanket. I have to slide this forward a little bit. Okay, and then come to lie back. So she's still dropping her shoulders off the edge of the blanket. The blanket under her neck, right? You'll see that little roll that's supporting the back of her neck, filling in the space of the cervical spine. Now, because the bolster is higher, we need to move the blanket supporting the heels a little further back and maybe even make it a little bit higher. Just roll this up. Okay, if you could bring your heels back down, that would be great. How does that feel? Okay, good. So you can see even more in this pose, right? The waves of the body in the back bend. You'll see that the back of Keely's head is grounded, her shoulders are dropping, right? Hips connected to the ground, and heels connected down to the earth. So it's a very grounding pose, but at the same time, you've got this opening of the chest, right? Opening of the throat, and this sense of spaciousness through the chest and the upper body. Mountain Brook pose does help to create more of an easeful sense with the breath. To add on to this, I've got these eye pillows, which we're actually going to use as hand pillows. These can be really nice just to add a little sense of grounding in the pose. I'm just going to place these onto Keely's palms. Okay, good. And then lastly, I'm going to take the last blanket, fold it in half, making that single fold, and I'll place that over Keely's hips. It can be very nice to have props on the body in these poses as an added sense of feeling that earthiness, that groundedness. And in addition to that, if I was to leave Keely in this pose for a while, I might cover her with a blanket. With backbending poses, you might not stay in them as long as you would some of the other poses. So I would say starting out in Mountain Brook, maybe 5 minutes, or building up to 5 minutes, maybe maximum up to 10 minutes. It can feel quite intense, even though it is a lovely, spacious pose. So you may want to start out with the first Mountain Brook, just one blanket under the back, and stay there for a while, right? Building your way up to this higher back bend. So see how you feel, right? You can play around with these different variations. I hope you've enjoyed Mountain Brook pose, and I hope that you'll play around with some of these variations in your practice and in your teaching. And I'll see you in the next module.